Bullies mocked the quiet black girl, until she revealed her martial arts black belt. Most people think silence is empty. They're wrong. Silence is full of things waiting to be understood, like the space between musical notes that makes the melody possible. I learned this lesson sitting in third period algebra, watching the new girl struggle with something that had nothing to do with equations. Her name was Jasmine, and she was beautiful in a way that made other girls jealous and boys nervous. Dark skin that caught the light just right, natural hair pulled back in a neat bun, and eyes that seemed to absorb everything around her. But what struck me most wasn't her beauty, it was the way she moved her hands. They danced in the air like birds, swift and graceful, telling stories I couldn't read. When Mrs. Patterson called on her to solve a problem on the board, Jasmine pointed to her ears and shook her head. A few students snickered. Someone whispered, "Great, another special case." I had been the quiet black girl in the corner for 3 years at Ridgewood High. The one teachers forgot to call on, the one who ate lunch alone while reading, the one who observed everything and said nothing. But something about Jasmine's isolation felt different from mine. Mine was a choice. Hers wasn't. After class, I approached her cautiously. I pulled out my phone and typed, "Hi, I'm Maya. Are you okay?" Her face lit up like someone had just handed her a gift. She typed back quickly, "I'm Jasmine. I'm deaf. Most people just ignore me." That night, I stayed up until 2 a.m. watching ASL tutorials on YouTube. My fingers felt clumsy and stupid compared to Jasmine's graceful movements, but I practiced the alphabet until my hands cramped. The next day, I walked up to her locker and signed my first real sentence. "Good morning. Want to sit together at lunch?" Her smile could have powered the entire school. We became inseparable after that. I learned that Jasmine was funnier than any comedian on TV, but her humor was visual, in the way she could mimic our teachers' expressions perfectly, or create elaborate stories with just her hands that had me silently laughing until my sides hurt. She was also brilliant. While I struggled through calculus, she tutored me using visual methods that made complex concepts suddenly click. But Ridgewood High wasn't built for students like Jasmine. The school had one part-time interpreter who covered 3 districts, meaning Jasmine spent most of her day lost in silent classrooms. When she asked questions, teachers would nod and smile but rarely understood what she needed. When she tried to participate in group projects, classmates would talk around her like she wasn't there. "Why don't you say something?" she asked me one day, her signs sharp with frustration. We were sitting in the library during lunch, hiding from the cafeteria chaos. "About what?" I signed back, though I knew exactly what she meant. "About how they treat me. About how they treat you. You see everything, Maya. You notice when people are cruel." She was right. I did notice. I noticed when Kyle Morrison, the Golden Boy basketball captain, would lean over to his teammates and whisper when Jasmine walked by. I noticed when teachers would speak louder and slower to her, even though being deaf didn't mean she was stupid. I noticed when students would wave their hands mockingly behind her back, thinking they were hilarious. I noticed, but I never acted. That was my role, the observer, the quiet one, the girl who kept her head down and her opinions to herself. "I'm not like you," I signed. "I don't know how to fight." "Fighting isn't just with fists," Jasmine replied, her expression serious. "Sometimes fighting is just refusing to be invisible." But I had been invisible for so long, I wasn't sure I knew how to be anything else. At home, I was the middle child between my overachieving older sister and my attention-demanding younger brother. At school, I was the kid who handed in assignments on time and never caused trouble. Even at my martial arts dojo, where I'd been training since I was 8, I was known as the student who worked hard but never competed. Yes, martial arts. That was my secret, the one thing about me that didn't fit the quiet girl image. 3 nights a week and Saturday mornings, I transformed from Maya the invisible into someone else entirely. Someone who could break boards with precision, someone who could move like water and strike like lightning. But that Maya lived in the dojo. School Maya was different, softer, safer, silent. Sensei Williams always said that martial arts wasn't about fighting. It's about balance, he would tell us. Balance in your body, balance in your mind, balance in your spirit. A true martial artist knows when to act and when to wait. I had been waiting for 3 years. They call us the mute girl and the quiet black chick who talks with her hands. I signed to Jasmine one afternoon. We were walking to the bus stop, and I could feel eyes on us from the group of jocks hanging around the parking lot. I know, she signed back. But you know what I call us? What? The girls who see everything and remember it all. That phrase stuck with me. Because Jasmine was right, we did see everything. We saw how the popular kids were actually insecure beneath their confidence. We saw which teachers cared and which ones were just counting down to retirement. We saw the small cruelties and casual prejudices that others ignored. Most importantly, we saw each other. In a school of 1,200 students, we had found the one person who understood what it meant to be overlooked, underestimated, and misunderstood. But seeing everything meant we also saw the storm coming long before it hit. The trouble started small, the way most disasters do. Jasmine's locker would be slightly ajar when she was sure she closed it. Her books would be rearranged. Little things that could be explained away as coincidence or carelessness. Then the incidents got bolder. Someone put petroleum jelly on her locker handle. Her backpack was, accidentally, kicked across the hallway. During assemblies, when the school finally remembered to turn on closed captioning, it would mysteriously malfunction halfway through. I started keeping a mental list of every incident, every perpetrator, every witness who said nothing. My silence wasn't acceptance anymore, it was reconnaissance. The breaking point was coming. I could feel it building like pressure before a storm. And when it hit, I would have to choose, remain the quiet observer I'd always been, or become something else entirely. Something that might surprise everyone, including myself. The first real warning came on a Tuesday morning in October. I arrived at school early, as usual, preferring the quiet hallways before the chaos began. That's when I found Jasmine standing in front of her locker, shoulders shaking. The metal door hung open like a broken jaw. Inside, her carefully organized books were scattered across the bottom, pages torn and crumpled. Someone had poured chocolate milk over everything, creating a sticky, brown mess that smelled sour and deliberately cruel. But the worst part was the note taped to the back wall, written in thick black marker. Freaks should stay home. How long have you been standing here? I signed, my hands trembling with anger. 10 minutes. Maybe 15. Jasmine's signs were small, defeated. I keep thinking if I stare long enough, it will make sense. Who hates me this much? I helped her clean up, my mind racing. This wasn't random teenage meanness. This was targeted, personal, planned. Someone had stayed after school or come early to do this. Someone who knew her schedule, her habits, her vulnerabilities. We gathered what could be saved and threw away the rest. I gave her my extra notebooks and promised to share my textbooks. But as we walked to first period, I could see the damage went deeper than ruined supplies. Jasmine moved differently now, constantly looking over her shoulder, her usual confidence replaced by wariness. The next incident happened during third period. I was in AP History when I got a text from Jasmine. Interpreter didn't show up again. Third time this month. I raised my hand. Mrs. Rodriguez, can I go to the bathroom? Instead of the bathroom, I went straight to the main office. Mrs. Henderson, the secretary, looked up from her computer with barely concealed annoyance. The ASL interpreter for Jasmine Chin, I said. She's supposed to be here for third period. Oh, that? Mrs. Henderson waved dismissively. There was a scheduling conflict. The interpreter had to cover Kennedy Middle School today. But Jasmine has a calculus test. She'll have to make it up later. When? Tomorrow the interpreter is at Roosevelt High. Mrs. Henderson's smile became tight and plastic. I'm sure we can work something out. Now, don't you have class to get back to? I wanted to argue, to demand they fix their broken system, to point out that this scheduling conflict seemed to happen every time Jasmine had something important. But the old Maya, the quiet Maya, just nodded and left. That afternoon, I decided to talk to Vice Principal Davis. He was young, supposedly progressive, the kind of administrator who put diversity posters on his walls and used phrases like inclusive environment. Surely he would listen. I'm concerned about the harassment targeting Jasmine Chin. I began, sitting across from his desk covered in motivational quotes and school spirit trophies. Mr. Davis leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Harassment is a very serious accusation, Maya. What specific incidents are you referring to? I listed everything: the locker vandalism, the missing interpreter, the cruel mimicry, the accidental disruptions during announcements when closed captioning was turned off. With each incident, his expression grew more skeptical. These sound like unfortunate coincidences and typical teenage behavior, he said finally. High school can be challenging for everyone. Perhaps you're being a bit oversensitive. The word hit me like a slap. Oversensitive. The same word used to dismiss every girl who dared to speak up, every person of color who pointed out injustice, every victim who refused to suffer in silence. So if someone poured chocolate milk in your locker and called you a freak, that would be teenage behavior? Now, Maya, there's no need to get emotional. I understand you want to protect your friend, but sometimes the best way to handle these situations is to ignore them. Bullies lose interest when they don't get a reaction. I left his office feeling like I had swallowed glass. Ignore them. Let it slide. Be the good girl who doesn't make waves. But the universe had other plans. The next day, I was heading to my locker after gym class when I heard familiar laughter from around the corner. I recognized Kyle Morrison's voice immediately, the basketball captain, the golden boy whose picture was plastered all over the school's athletic achievements board. I peeked around the corner and saw him with 3 of his teammates. They were watching something on his phone, laughing so hard they had to lean against the lockers for support. Do it again, one of them wheezed. The part where she goes like this. Kyle began moving his hands in exaggerated, jerky motions, nothing like the fluid grace of actual ASL. His face was contorted in a mocking expression of confusion, his movements deliberately clumsy and stupid-looking. And then she makes this face. He continued, scrunching up his features in what was supposed to be Jasmine's concentrated expression when she was trying to understand something. They erupted in fresh laughter. My stomach clenched as I realized what they were doing. Kyle was performing an impression of Jasmine, turning her beautiful language into a joke, her earnest attempts to communicate into entertainment for his friends. But the worst part was that Jasmine was walking toward them from the other direction, completely unaware of what was happening behind her back. My hands curled into fists. 3 years of martial arts training had taught me to harness anger, to channel it into controlled movement. But this was different. This was personal. This was my friend being degraded for their amusement. Sensei Williams' voice echoed in my head. Use your fists only when your voice is stolen. My voice wasn't stolen. Not yet. But as I watched Kyle continue his cruel performance, as I saw Jasmine approaching with no idea she was walking into a trap of humiliation, I felt something shift inside me. The quiet girl who let things slide was still there, but she was no longer alone. Standing beside her was someone else. Someone who had been training in secret, waiting in the shadows, learning to fight. Someone who was tired of being invisible. The announcement came during morning homeroom, crackling through the old intercom system like static electricity. All students report to the gymnasium at 2 p.m. for our annual Diversity and Inclusion Assembly. I watched Jasmine's face carefully as Mrs. Patterson repeated the announcement, this time facing the class so Jasmine could read her lips. Diversity Day at Ridgewood High was usually a parade of uncomfortable presentations about celebrating differences, while doing nothing to actually address them. But this year was different. This year, they wanted us. Maya Williams and Jasmine Chin, please report to the main office during lunch. Mrs. Patterson added, reading from a pink slip that had just been delivered. Jasmine caught my eye across the room, eyebrows raised in question. I shrugged, but something cold settled in my stomach. In 3 years at this school, I'd never been called to the office for anything positive. Principal Hawkins was waiting for us with his practiced smile, the one he used for school board meetings and parent conferences. Behind him sat Ms. Rodriguez from the counseling office and Mr. Chin, no relation to Jasmine, despite the shared last name, from the special education department. "Girls, we have an exciting opportunity," Principal Hawkins began, his voice artificially cheerful. "We'd like you to participate in tomorrow's assembly. Show the school how deaf students communicate, demonstrate some sign language, maybe share your friendship story." "Our friendship story?" I asked, my voice sharper than intended. "You know, how you learn ASL to help Jasmine, how you've overcome barriers together. It's very inspiring." I felt Jasmine stiffen beside me. Her signs were quick and angry. "They want to put us on display. Like zoo animals. We're not comfortable with that," I said aloud, translating her sentiment into words they could understand. Ms. Rodriguez leaned forward with her therapy voice, the one adults use when they think they're being wise. "I understand your hesitation, but this could be really valuable for both of you. And for the school community." "Valuable how?" Jasmine signed, and I interpreted. "She wants to know how this benefits us specifically." The adults exchanged glances. Principal Hawkins cleared his throat. "Well, it's an opportunity to educate your peers, to build understanding. And it looks good for the school's inclusion statistics." I interrupted, the words slipping out before I could stop them. The silence that followed was deafening. Principal Hawkins' smile never wavered, but his eyes went flat and cold. "I think you're misunderstanding our intentions, Maya. We genuinely want to celebrate the diversity in our school community." Jasmine was signing rapidly now, her movements sharp with frustration. I hesitated, then interpreted. "She says if you really wanted to celebrate diversity, you'd fix the broken interpreter schedule and stop the harassment in the hallways." Another pause. Mr. Chin shuffled through his papers uncomfortably. "What harassment?" Principal Hawkins asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. I wanted to list everything again: the locker incident, Kyle's cruel mimicry, the systematic exclusion Jasmine faced daily. But I also knew it would fall on deaf ears, just like it had with Vice Principal Davis. "We'll do it," I said suddenly, ignoring Jasmine's surprised look. "But we want to do it our way. No script, no coaching. Just let us show real communication." The adults exchanged relieved smiles. Of course. We want this to be authentic." As we left the office, Jasmine grabbed my arm. "Why did you agree? You know they just want to use us to make themselves look good." I stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "Because Kyle and his friends will be in that audience. Along with everyone else who thinks we're just the quiet girls who don't matter. So maybe it's time they learn something new about us." That afternoon, we stayed after school to rehearse in the empty gymnasium. The space felt different without the usual chaos of students, bigger, more echoing, more intimidating. A small stage had been set up at one end, with a large screen behind it for presentations. "What exactly are we going to do?" Jasmine asked as we stood on the stage, looking out at rows of empty bleachers. "I thought we could start with basic signs, then move into storytelling. Show them how beautiful ASL really is." We spent an hour practicing, Jasmine teaching me some of the more complex narrative techniques she'd learned from her parents. Her signing was poetry in motion, not the clumsy, mocking gestures Kyle had performed, but something graceful and precise and powerful. "You're getting really good," she signed. "Sometimes I forget you've only been learning for a few months." I had good motivation. I signed back, making her smile. As we packed up to leave, the custodian, Mr. Garcia, was setting up the tech equipment for tomorrow's assembly. The screen flickered to life, showing the standard school logo and "Welcome to Diversity Day" in cheerful fonts. Test, came a voice from the sound booth. "Can you hear me okay down there?" Mr. Garcia gave a thumbs up, then looked at us. "You girls the ones doing the presentation tomorrow?" We nodded. "That's nice. About time this school did something real about inclusion." He lowered his voice conspiratorially. "My daughter's deaf too, goes to Roosevelt. She'd be proud to see what you're doing." His words warmed me as we walked to the parking lot. Maybe this assembly wouldn't be the performative nonsense I'd expected. Maybe we could actually reach some people, change some minds. I should have known better. Because Kyle Morrison wasn't the type to let an opportunity for humiliation pass by. And tomorrow, he'd have a captive audience of 1,200 students and a live stream that would reach far beyond Ridgewood High's walls. The trap was already set. We just didn't know we were walking into it. The gymnasium was packed. Every seat in the bleachers was filled with students who would rather be anywhere else, their faces glowing in the light of their phones as they scrolled through social media, waiting for this mandatory assembly to end. Teachers lined the walls like sentries, trying to look engaged while clearly counting down the minutes until dismissal. Principal Hawkins took the microphone with his usual fanfare, launching into a speech about celebrating the rich tapestry of our diverse student body. His words echoed off the walls, meaningless and hollow. I watched from the side of the stage as Jasmine sat in the front row, her eyes fixed on the ASL interpreter who had miraculously appeared for this public event. "And now," Principal Hawkins announced, "we have a very special presentation from two of our outstanding students, Maya Williams and Jasmine Chin, who will demonstrate the beauty of American Sign Language and show us how friendship transcends all barriers." The applause was polite and scattered. A few students looked genuinely curious, but most seemed ready to endure another boring presentation. I walked onto the stage, my heart hammering against my ribs, and gestured for Jasmine to join me. She climbed the steps with grace, her head held high despite the sea of staring faces. We had practiced this moment a dozen times, but the reality of 1,200 pairs of eyes felt overwhelming. "Good afternoon," I began, my voice carrying across the gymnasium through the microphone clipped to my shirt. "My name is Maya, and this is my best friend Jasmine. We're here to show you something beautiful." I began with the basics, just as we had rehearsed. The alphabet, simple greetings, everyday phrases. Jasmine moved with fluid precision, her hands painting words in the air. Some students leaned forward, genuinely interested. Others whispered among themselves. Then we moved into storytelling. Jasmine began signing a tale about two birds who spoke different languages but learned to fly together. Her movements were poetry, each gesture flowing into the next with breathtaking grace. I translated her words, but I knew my voice couldn't capture the visual music she was creating. That's when everything went wrong. The screen behind us, which was supposed to display helpful subtitles for our presentation, suddenly flickered. Instead of our carefully prepared slides, a video began playing. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. Then my blood turned to ice. It was Kyle. The video showed him from last week, standing in the hallway with his friends, performing his cruel mimicry of Jasmine's signing. But this wasn't just a recording, it was edited, looped, set to mocking music. His exaggerated movements were slowed down and replayed, making them even more grotesque. Text had been added. "Deaf Girl Dance Challenge," and "When you forget to turn the sound on." Laughter erupted from the audience. Not the polite chuckles of an awkward assembly, but real laughter, mean, delighted, cruel. Students pulled out their phones, some recording the screen, others filming our reactions. The laughter spread like wildfire through the bleachers. I spun around to look at Jasmine. Her face had gone pale, her hands frozen in mid-sign. She was staring at the screen in horror, watching herself be mocked in front of the entire school. Tears welled in her eyes, and I saw her begin to shake. "Turn it off!" I shouted at the tech booth, but my voice was lost in the noise of the crowd. Teachers were starting to move, but too slowly, too late. That's when Kyle himself appeared. He walked onto the stage with that same smug grin I'd seen in the hallway, wearing his Letterman jacket like armor. The crowd cheered when they saw him, recognizing their golden boy. He waved at his friends in the audience, then turned to face us. "Nice presentation, girls," he said, his voice amplified by the stage microphones. "But I think mine was better." He began to move his hands in the same mocking gestures from the video, fake signing gibberish while making exaggerated facial expressions. The audience roared with laughter and approval. Someone started a slow clap. Others cheered his name. Jasmine's tears spilled over. She tried to sign something to me, but her hands were shaking too badly to form coherent words. The humiliation was complete, public, and being recorded from dozens of angles. "Your turn," Kyle said, turning to face me directly. His eyes were bright with malicious joy. "Show us how the quiet girl talks with her hands." That's when something inside me snapped. Not broke, snapped. Like a rubber band stretched too far, like a dam holding back years of accumulated rage and frustration and helpless silence. I had watched this boy and his friends torment my best friend for months. I had reported it to adults who called me oversensitive. I had tried to protect her through proper channels that led nowhere. I stepped between Kyle and Jasmine, my body moving with the fluid precision of 3 years of martial arts training. The crowd noise faded to background static. My breathing slowed. My vision sharpened. "Get off the stage," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos with deadly calm. Kyle's grin widened. He was used to backing down quiet girls with his size and popularity. "Or what?" He reached out to push past me, his hand moving toward my shoulder with casual arrogance. Time slowed. I could see the trajectory of his movement, the exact moment when his momentum would make him vulnerable. I sidestepped. Kyle's hand met empty air, and his forward momentum carried him off balance. He stumbled, confusion replacing his smugness for just a moment. That's when he made his second mistake. He lunged. 2 moves. That's all it took. A wrist lock that redirected his energy against himself, followed by a sweeping throw that sent him to the ground with a satisfying thud. Kyle Morrison, basketball captain and king of Ridgewood High, landed hard on his back in front of 1,200 students, stunned and humiliated. The gymnasium fell silent. The only sound was my own breathing and the soft whir of phone cameras still recording. Jasmine was crying. I wasn't breathing. But somewhere in the back of the bleachers, someone was still live streaming, and our moment of truth was about to become much bigger than either of us could have imagined. The suspension letter arrived on a Tuesday, delivered to my house by a nervous-looking secretary who wouldn't meet my parents' eyes. Excessive force. Public disruption. Aggressive behavior unbecoming of a Ridgewood High student. The words swam on the page like accusations written in blood. Kyle got 3 days off for participating in an unfortunate incident. 3 days. I got 2 weeks and a hearing to determine if I'd be expelled entirely. My mother said, sitting across from me at our kitchen table, the letter spread between us like evidence at a crime scene. What really happened in that gymnasium? I told her everything. Every detail, every cruel moment, every second of watching my best friend be humiliated while adults stood by and did nothing. When I finished, my mother was quiet for a long time. "You used martial arts training to hurt another student," she said finally. "I used martial arts training to stop another student from hurting my friend. The school sees it differently. The school sees what it wants to see." But the hardest part wasn't the suspension or the potential expulsion or the disappointed looks from teachers who had considered me one of the good ones. The hardest part was that Jasmine stopped coming to school entirely. For 3 days, I texted her constantly. No response. I went to her house, but her parents said she was sick and couldn't have visitors. I knew she wasn't sick, at least not in any way that medicine could cure. The isolation was suffocating. I sat in my room, scrolling through social media, watching as different versions of what happened spread through the school like wildfire. Some posts called me a hero. Others labeled me a violent thug who had attacked an innocent student. The truth, as usual, was buried somewhere in between. That's when something strange began to happen. It started with a notification on my phone. "Your video has been shared 50 times. Then 500. Then 5,000. The live stream from the assembly, the one I'd barely noticed in the chaos, had been clipped, edited, and was spreading across platforms I'd never even heard of. But this wasn't the version Kyle, and his friends had intended to go viral. Someone had posted the full context. The cruel video of Kyle mocking Jasmine, the crowd's laughter, his public humiliation of her on stage, and then my intervention. The caption read, "When silence defends silence, deaf student bullied at school assembly until friend steps in." The clip was being shared by disability rights accounts, anti-bullying organizations, and martial arts communities. Comments poured in from around the world. "This girl is a true friend. Schools need to do better protecting vulnerable students. Perfect technique on that throw, clearly trained. Why are the adults just standing there?" By Thursday, the video had been viewed over 2 million times. News outlets started calling. My parents' phones rang constantly. Reporters showed up at our door asking for interviews. Then she appeared. Dr. Sarah Martinez was nothing like what I expected an advocate to look like. She was small, probably in her 50s, with graying hair and the kind of quiet intensity that reminded me of myself. She sat in our living room wearing a simple business suit and introduced herself as the director of the National Deaf Youth Advocacy Foundation. "I've seen the video," she said without preamble. "I've also done some research into the systematic failures at Ridgewood High. Your friend Jasmine isn't the first deaf student they've failed, and she won't be the last unless something changes. What do you want from us?" my father asked, his lawyer instincts kicking in. "I want to help. Maya, you're facing a disciplinary hearing next week that could derail your entire future over defending your friend from public humiliation. That's not justice. That's institutional bullying." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Ridgewood High has received federal funding for special education services for the past 5 years. They're required by law to provide adequate interpreter services, anti-bullying protections, and inclusive environments for students with disabilities. They've failed on all counts. So what happens now?" I asked. "Now we make some noise. The video has already brought national attention to this issue. Major news networks want to interview you both. Disability rights organizations are planning to attend your hearing. Your martial arts instructor called. Apparently he's quite proud of his student. Sensei Williams." I hadn't even thought about how he'd react to seeing his techniques used in a school fight. "And Jasmine?" I asked. "She won't even talk to me." Dr. Martinez's expression softened. "Humiliation is a form of trauma, Maya. Jasmine needs time to process what happened. But she also needs to know she's not alone, that what happened to her matters, that her voice, signed or spoken, has value. The school board is meeting Friday to discuss your case," she continued. "They're expecting a quiet hearing with nervous parents and a contrite student who apologizes for her behavior. Instead, they're going to face cameras, advocates, and some very pointed questions about their federal compliance." My mother leaned forward. "What exactly are you proposing?" "I'm proposing we turn Maya's hearing into something bigger. A conversation about inclusion, about protecting vulnerable students, about what happens when institutions fail the people they're supposed to serve." I thought about Jasmine, sitting alone in her room, probably convinced that the entire world had seen her worst moment. I thought about Kyle, who would return to school as the victim of an unprovoked attack. I thought about all the other quiet kids, the different kids, the kids who didn't fit the mold, watching this unfold and wondering if anyone would ever stand up for them. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. Dr. Martinez smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. "Just tell the truth. And maybe, if you're willing, help us make sure this never happens to another student again." Outside, I could hear cars pulling up to our house. More reporters, more cameras, more attention than our quiet neighborhood had ever seen. The story was growing beyond anything I could have imagined. The quiet girl was about to become anything but quiet. The Ridgewood High School board meeting room had never seen anything like it. What was supposed to be a routine disciplinary hearing had transformed into something resembling a civil rights trial. Cameras lined the back wall, reporters scribbled furiously in notebooks, and advocates filled every available seat. I sat at a small table facing the 7-member school board, Dr. Martinez beside me like a shield made of quiet determination. My parents flanked my other side, my mother's hand warm and steady on my shoulder. But the person I most wanted to see wasn't there. Jasmine's empty chair felt like a missing tooth, obvious and painful. Principal Hawkins began with his prepared statement, painting me as a dangerous student who had escalated a minor disagreement into physical violence. He made Kyle sound like an innocent victim, glossing over the systematic harassment that had led to that moment. Miss Williams' actions were clearly premeditated, he concluded. She admits to 3 years of martial arts training, which makes her attack on Mr. Morrison particularly concerning. Dr. Martinez rose smoothly when given the chance to respond. She didn't raise her voice, didn't gesture dramatically. She simply began to play video clips on the large screen at the front of the room. First, security footage of Jasmine's locker being vandalized. Then, recordings of Kyle and his friends mocking sign language in the hallways. Screenshots of the cruel memes they'd created and shared online. Email chains showing how interpreter services had been mysteriously reassigned whenever Jasmine had important events. This isn't a story about one violent incident, Dr. Martinez said calmly. This is a story about institutional failure. About a school that received federal funding to support students with disabilities while systematically excluding them from full participation in school life. Board member Susan Chin, the progressive one who always asked tough questions, leaned forward. Mr. Hawkins, were you aware of these incidents before the assembly? Some concerns were brought to our attention, but we found no evidence of systematic harassment. Because you didn't look, Dr. Martinez interrupted. Maya Williams documented incident after incident. She reported them to your staff. She was told she was being oversensitive. Does that sound like due diligence to you? The room was dead silent except for the scratch of pens and the soft click of camera shutters. I watched the board members' faces, seeing doubt creep into their expressions. That's when the door opened. Jasmine walked in with her parents, her head held high despite the sea of staring faces. She wore a simple blue dress and carried herself with dignity that made my chest tight with pride. Behind her walked someone I hadn't expected, Sensei Williams, wearing his formal black GI with the red belt that marked him as a master instructor. Jasmine took the seat beside me and signed quickly. I'm sorry I disappeared. I needed time to find my voice. You found it. I signed back. When given the opportunity to speak, Jasmine stood and faced the board directly. Her interpreter, a woman I'd never seen before but who moved with the fluid precision of true expertise, positioned herself beside the microphone. My name is Jasmine Chin, she began, her hands painting words with fierce grace. I am 17 years old, I have a 4.2 GPA, and I am deaf. I am not broken. I am not less than. I am not a problem to be solved or ignored. She detailed every incident, every microaggression, every moment of exclusion she had endured. But more than that, she talked about watching Maya learn ASL, about their friendship, about what it meant to have someone willing to stand up when institutions failed. Maya didn't attack anyone, Jasmine continued. She protected someone who was being publicly humiliated while authority figures stood by and watched. If that's violence, then the real violence is what this school does to students like me every single day. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Board Chair Williams gavelled for order, but I could see the writing on the wall and the board members' expressions. Sensei Williams spoke last, addressing the violence question directly. In 3 years of training, Maya has never started a fight, never used her skills aggressively, never shown anything but control and discipline. What she demonstrated that day wasn't violence, it was precisely what martial arts is supposed to be. Protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The board deliberated for less than 20 minutes. After careful consideration, Board Chair Williams announced, "The suspension against Maya Williams is hereby overturned. Furthermore, the board directs administration to conduct a comprehensive review of our accessibility services and anti-bullying protocols." The crowd erupted again, but I barely heard it. I was watching Jasmine, who was crying and laughing at the same time. Later that evening, after the reporters had left and the cameras were packed away, Dr. Martinez made us an offer that would change everything. There's a National Teen Leadership Council for Inclusion and Disability Awareness, she said. They want both of you. And there's a TEDx organizer who thinks your story needs a bigger platform. 6 months later, Jasmine and I stood on a red carpet in front of an audience of 2,000 people. The talk was titled, When Silence Defends Silence, Finding Your Voice in an Unjust World. At Ridgewood High, things were different now. Jasmine had a full-time interpreter and an apology from the board. The hallways had anti-bullying posters featuring real students, including us. Kyle? He lost his captainship, and his basketball scholarship was under review. But the real change was smaller, more personal. Students who had never noticed us before now signed, "Hello," in the hallways. Teachers asked Jasmine questions directly instead of talking around her. The quiet kids, the different kids, the ones who didn't fit, they walked a little taller. And me? I was still the quiet girl. But I had learned the difference between being silent and being silenced, between being invisible and being overlooked. People looked at me differently now, with a mixture of respect and wariness. Some called me a hero, others a troublemaker. I didn't care about their awe or their fear. I cared that Jasmine signed with confidence again, that she laughed without checking over her shoulder, that she believed her voice, signed or spoken, mattered. And that next time someone tried to steal that voice, they'd remember. I'm the quiet girl. Not the weak one.